As the Chinese President Xi Jinping is close to wrapping up his first European tour, EU states are falling head over heels in their efforts to court Beijing. So much so that they are even ready to sweep under the carpet all talk of sanctioning Russia over Ukraine. Beijing says it won't take sides on Crimea, fearing it would alienate Moscow. And that's got the EU worried its political stance could jeopardize trade links with the Asian powerhouse. RT's correspondent Peter Oliver filed this investigation.
Smiles and handshakes all round. That's what greeted Chinese President Xi Jinping on his first official visit to Europe. The welcome in Berlin, a repeat of scenes in Paris just days earlier. With European governments like the one here in Germany cozying up to Chinese industry, does this suggest that they're a little concerned that the ongoing dispute between themselves and Russia over the situation in Ukraine could come back to bite European countries in the bank balance?
Sanctions and this whole uproar over Crimea is simply foolishness on the part of the EU. But the EU has nothing to gain by sanctions on Russia.
The EU is considering sanctions, knowing that financially they could end up shooting themselves in the foot. So they aren't in the mood to criticise cash cow China too much over long-standing human rights allegations.
The EU further calls upon the Chinese authorities to ensure that all human rights of all minorities are respected. The EU is profoundly saddened by the numerous self-immolations in Tibetan inhabited areas.
Germany continues to be worried about human rights violations in China.
Now, though, they're happy to let the business of doing business take centre stage. Europe's realpolitik has a very short memory. Peter Oliver, RT, Berlin.
And with the US and EU still enraged by Crimea's reunification with Moscow, talk is rife that more crippling sanctions on Russia will follow. But many business and political leaders worry that further restrictions on the Kremlin could ultimately backfire on Europe itself. RT's Alexei Rashevsky explains what it could lead to.
In the last several weeks, the word sanctions has dominated all Russia-related news.
Every member of the G7 has imposed sanctions.
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 We make sure that unacceptable actions will bear very serious consequences.
So far, the sanctions of the EU and the US have been personal, frozen assets of certain Russians and visa bans. But talk of wider economic sanctions has been circulating. So who actually stands to win and lose if the West decides to go further? Let's take a look using the example of the world's most ancient game, chess. Let's imagine the EU moves to impose trade sanctions. But that does little to frighten Moscow, which could just castle, in other words, moving the king away from the threat. It said if Europe blocks oil and gas deals, the most sensitive area of business, Russia would instead look to the superpower on its eastern border, China. The soon-to-be world's largest economy is hungry for new resources and markets. So where does this leave Europe? Should it escalate sanctions, its trade turnover with Russia of more than $400 billion would be plunged into doubt. Losses like that are difficult to alleviate, so Europe would then have to strengthen trade ties with, guess who? China. Trade already stands at more than $500 billion a year. So EU here finds itself trapped on the board, giving the advantage to China while failing to punish Russia. In a nutshell, if the EU fails to think ahead in the game, it might lose strategically in the end, even despite making the first move.
All right, we're now joined by RT's Katie Pilbeam, the host of Venture Capital, bright and early on a Monday morning. Thanks for jumping in, Katie. So as we're talking about the whole global economic ups and downs, it would appear that China continues to remain in the economic driver's seat.
Absolutely. Everyone wants a piece of China at the moment, don't they? Rightly so, because it has been growing at a phenomenal rate. We're going to check it out. We're going to look back in history, Rory. So the Chinese economy, it's come a long way since being one of the poorest countries in the world back in 1978. Now the biggest economy in the world. Now, since then, China has overtaken Europe's powerhouse, Germany. It's been transforming with reforms, including mass privatisation, the opening up of the country to foreign investment, impressive production rates, cheap labour. All of this, as you can see just here, resulting. Now, China is the world's largest trading nation. It took that title in 2013, a title the US has held for decades. Let's check out some of these exports. So EU to the exports to China, as you can see just there, reaching a record almost $150 billion euros. And these products are mainly machinery, equipment, motor vehicles, aircrafts, chemicals. And we've also got, it works both ways, with China to the EU, the biggest supplier too, just shy of 280 billion euros. Imports dominated by industrial and consumer goods, machinery, equipment, footwear and clothing, furniture as well just there. So we're talking big money. Now China also, well, they love their cars as well. Their German cars in particular, as you can see just there, a bit of Volkswagen, a big $18.2 billion deal there. And as for Russia, well, trade between the two has been escalating as well. And last summer, we had this huge deal here, the China deal, to supply the country with fuel for 25 years. Now, with the threat of sanctions from the West, the business relationship between Russia and China has never been so crucial. And geographically, well, it makes sense because, of course, the two share a border. Now, China is already the second largest importer of Russian goods, second to Europe. By 2030, China is predicted to become the world's biggest economy. And with that title comes political power. And China is more in demand than ever before. And as you can see, by 2018, it's predicted to become the biggest economy in the world. So it is absolutely phenomenal, isn't it, what we've seen in the last 3 decades, Rory, how it's transformed the economy of China.
Well, I mean, it is astonishing, actually, when you think about, we're always doing headlines about the debt of the European Union, or America, for that matter. China is holding trillions of American debt, and yet here we have China, that all eyes are on China, and we continue to see economic shufflings.
Indeed, like a chess game.
Yep, absolutely. The global chessboard. Katie Pilbeam, the host of Venture Capital. Thank you.